All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. Gonna talk with Sean McCoy and the Woke Centrist, aka Dusty Cubes, aka Dustin Cubit, today about some very controversial and popular topics today. Of course, I put that really attention courting title there, are all cops racist murderers? Hashtag Black Lives Matter, because some people have this opinion. And so we're going to talk about all of these topics like police brutality, racism, Black Lives Matter, wokeness, and, all those sorts of topics. And I wanted to talk with you guys specifically about this because I know we all have we tend to have very nuanced views about these subjects and uh, try to avoid demonizing one side over the other and try to see um, where whichever political ideology we're talking about makes good points and where they maybe make some bad points. And like for example, I think that those protests that have been happening, I think they're happening for understandable reasons. But I think that this violence that is sometimes happening with the riots and looting and stuff, that's not good. And people boiling all the problems with police brutality down to nothing other than racism is an oversimplification, to say the least. It's like focusing on one factor in a multifactorial scenario. So yeah, I guess whichever one of you guys wants to go first, I guess what would one of you guys like to just state your thoughts in general, or just go into one specific aspect of this if you want to? Either way.
There's a part of me that wants to defer to Dusty just because.
I'll go.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Yeah, there's just a
wait,
total.
just Dusty.
I'll,
For people who can't see you, you're black.
yes, I just can't be on camera because I am at work.
Right, right.
Um, yeah, there's just a huge lack of nuanced conversation regarding the whole um, movement. Like, there are definite flaws within Black Lives Matter that are easily able to point to. But it is not like their message isn't solid. So when I say flaws, just looking at the successful protest movements in the past, like specifically, the civil rights movement, um, Gandhi and his pacifistic protests, have all of those methods have seemed to be the most successful methods that have actually won the most hearts. And right now, because the Black Lives Matter has no hierarchy, um, it's super unfocused, and they're not able to rein in behaviors that run that are antithetical to what they're fighting for. I don't believe like the leadership. Well, there really isn't a leadership. That's the problem with BLM. Like, there's no voice that can rein in on all the insanity. Like you had Dr. King, where he would actively talk against using any type of violence and tried to make sure people were acted accordingly. From different sources, I've heard different things regarding Dr. King's protests. Like, I heard that there was actually some violence there. It just wasn't a big deal at the time because there was a lot of violence perpetrated against the peaceful protesters. But from what I've read into it, not all the protests were peaceful either. But as far as like just understanding what's going on, it's and just reading chatter online, like you hear a lot of people think that like Black Lives Matter is this Marxist movement. It just makes me kind of face palm every time I hear that. And
Yeah,
then
that's
there's
like one
these,
thing that Brett Weinstein and people like that have been saying, which I haven't really seen any evidence for when he talks about that.
no, it's just like he does the whole connect the dots conspiracy theory type of deal to kind of rope in Marxism with Black Lives Matter. Yeah, it's just, weird conspiracy theory nonsense. But on the other hand, um, the messaging at the very beginning of the movement wasn't very clear either. Like, just the chant is in itself almost divisive, but that's just a messaging problem. I think there have been some people that have addressed that. I think one of those is Hawk Newsom. I think you've seen like some videos of him talking about what the movement actually means, as opposed to people's gut reaction to the name of the movement. Like,
Yeah. You
like
turn me on to him. He's the I think he's the New York State leader of Black Lives Matter, perhaps, and he seems to have a much more nuanced view and like idea of bringing of people of different colors together to address these problems rather than like alienating people based on race.
yeah, so he's probably one to reach out to across the aisle more to discuss the problems. But yeah, it's just we live in an age where information is so confusing. Like, I can't believe how many people are duped by extremely dubious news sources. And like the other day, this older guy that I have on Facebook, and he's black too, and he posted like some article from, okay, you've heard of the Gateway Pundit before, and they're like extremely dubious news source. And then we're taking another blog that sourced the Gateway Pundit. So it's like we're doing a telephone game of misinformation. So the one that I looked at said, oh yeah, a Black Lives Matter activist went into a bar and shot 2 people. And it took me, I had to dig past 2 sources to find out that half of the story was false.
Wow,
And it's a big problem. Like,
it
people
is.
just don't know how to sift through information and find the wheat from the chaff. It's a big problem that's happening today, which is kind of coloring political division, and actually uses political division as a profit motive. Like, I'm pretty sure like all of these super partisan news sources aren't really. I can't seem to imagine that the motivation is not purely political, and there has to be some type of financial niche that they're chasing there.
And you and I have talked before too about like the corporate virtue signaling about probably fake support for things like Black Lives Matter. Like, we can say Black Lives Matter, and that means that we're a good corporation, right? We're not going to actually do anything to solve these problems. We're just going to say that we're on the right side.
Yeah, the technical term is greenwashing.
Yeah.
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 But I totally get that. Like, and I don't, because my friend works for a gaming company. I'm not gonna put the name of the company on blast. It's a pretty significant company, but there was a lot of internal strife about the CEO not wanting to talk about any of the political strife regarding race. As somebody who kind of understands that they're running a business that caters to everybody, that doesn't have any political messaging, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a video game company CEO to come out and say, "Oh yes, Black Lives Matter." Like I get the support. Like, take your political groups, do your support that way. Like, I don't give a rat's ass if McDonald's is in support of Black Lives Matter. It's just not
Hamburger at
something that really.
McDonald's.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna eat at McDonald's now because they support Black Lives Matter, or oh no, I'm not gonna eat Chick-fil-A anymore because they didn't say anything about Black Lives Matter. It just becomes a ridiculous reach when we got politics in everything. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. So there, another reason is I think you've heard about the Spotify deal, and there's a lot of backlash between employees and the
Oh yeah, that
leadership. And
Rogan, right?
yeah, it's kind of the same deal that's happening in the company that my friend works for. Like a bunch of employees are complaining that um, their political messaging isn't on par with what they believe in, even though, like in my case, when I talked about the game company, they have no political messaging, and they never have from what I've experienced. So it's just, I don't know, it's just getting too much. People just need to chill out a bit. But I think that doesn't it doesn't really pinpoint the issues of the conversation when we're talking about, Black Lives Matter. It's just, oh, we're for Black Lives Matter. That's it. There's no conversation revolving around it. We're just saying, oh yeah, we support them.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. It doesn't seem genuine to me.
That's why, like you were talking earlier about how there's no consistent messaging. Like it's like how we've talked before about how, for example, people can have a wide variety of different views on what the term defund the police means. Like to some people it literally means abolish the police, and to others it means things that you've told me about, Dusty, that make a lot more sense to me, like ending the drug war, or like having social workers deal with homeless people instead of cops, or at least having them accompany cops and maybe take the main role there.
Yeah, it just seems like in our society, everyone wants to hit 911 for any issue, and only people who show up in those cases are the fire department, the ambulance, or the cops.
Yeah.
And they can't always handle every situation. Uh, so I don't know, just a lot of. I think there was a recent case where um, a man had run out of uh, outside naked. He was having some type of mental issue or breakdown, and his brother called the cops to help assist in finding him, and they ended up handling him very roughly, and I believe he was put on life support, and he's not really there. He's like a vegetable now because they didn't really know how to handle this guy correctly. So it's just, cops are like relatively poorly trained compared to, other countries. It seems like here they really don't have enough training. The psychological profiling doesn't seem to be all there. These are people that want to serve society, not get a power trip. And I understand that when the adrenaline's running, people just make some crazy decisions, but there's probably training that can mitigate that. Because I know Jocko talked about how crazily he would drill his people to make sure that under the worst circumstances, they would have the training required to get them out of those circumstances. Like you can imagine what kind of stresses and things sending a SEAL team on, and you can imagine how something could go wrong if they don't have the right amount of training. And it's just drilling and drilling. Like it takes a while, repetition. These are not things that cops don't usually train too much. And perhaps we need to get military level of training. And I don't mean like military as in make them more militaristic, but get them enough training so that when they're put in a stressful or tense situation, they know how to get through it properly instead of just losing their cool and making a mistake that causes somebody their life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was those are really good points that Jocko was making on that Joe Rogan podcast about how about emphasizing training and consistent training of police officers would perhaps be a really good idea. And also, I was thinking to go back to one of the things you said at the start. I remember we've talked a lot about that guy Daryl Davis and how he's like literally converted some white nationalists and Nazis by becoming friends with them. So it's like the opposite of a violent message, right? And you could even say it's like for from your perspective, Sean, you might be even able to say it's sort of like the message of Jesus in a way, like uniting people instead of dividing them to try to solve problems.
Well, I appreciate that beautiful segue because it is, as I see it, in terms of the Christ and what that sentiment is around. I think was within all of us. I think we all know that inherently. I would say it's really really difficult to do. I mean, it's really really difficult to do that and to have the kind of courage that somebody like Daryl has, or to have the kind of courage that somebody like Martin Luther King has, or anyone that has been wronged for something as simple or as mundane as gender or sexuality or their skin color, and to actually have their lives, their actual physical and emotional lives impacted by something like that, and to have the grace, which is another, as I see it, tenet of the Christ, and what I think that emanates within all of us as well, to take that situation and be almost justified. I go back and I listen to Malcolm X, and at the same time I hear people like him, and it's kind of hard to argue, right? It's kind of hard to argue in some areas, some of those frustrations that sometimes when the peaceful situation doesn't work, what's next, and what do you do when somebody else is not peaceful? That was the big question that everybody has. I think so many people, I think in the world of Christianity, especially Western Christianity, love the idea, and yet, yet you ask somebody, especially where I'm from, I just recently sold all the guns in my house except for one hunting rifle and one hunting shotgun, because I didn't want any guns in my house anymore. And, you'd have thought amongst the people that I know that I had, I could stop being a Christian and people wouldn't ask me two things about that probably, but I got rid of my guns and everybody's just like, why are you doing that? Like it was there was a kind of like well, what in the world are you going to do against the world if you're not armed? It's like, I think I'll be okay. I remember my dad texted me right as the pandemic started and actually asked me, which is, hey, do you have a couple handguns sitting around? Are you okay? And I'm like, I don't think I need a handgun for this. I said, well, you never know. And so it's kind of this, which I think undercurrents so much of this around our fear and around the uncertainty and around just the discomfort that something like that I think that Black Lives Matter has stirred in us. And I think that what's so interesting about the pandemic has actually created and forced to the front so many of these issues, especially in the business world. I'm actually starting a podcast. I was hired inside the oil and gas industry to talk about ESG. I don't know if you keep up with, in terms of corporate virtue signaling, as you were talking about. I mean, right now in the financial world, the business world, especially whether it's around energy or around finance, it's become a hot button. Like it's become this thing that you better have, and you better almost like what are you doing about this? And it's really, really complicated. It's ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And so it's basically the latest phase around corporate social responsibility or social responsible investing. What it really boils down to is what else is a corporation doing besides making money, which is a little bit of what Dusty was talking about in terms of responsibility, which I think is what he was ultimately getting at and was talking about, is what is a corporation's responsibility relative to the social and cultural impacts that it makes in the world. Where's that going, and what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to say that Black Lives Matter? Are they supposed to say that your gender doesn't matter? What are they supposed to say? And where it gets really, really interesting, for a more, probably a better application of a word, where I guess more complicated, is this idea that we've all agreed what the environmental expectations are relative to carbon emissions. Like we've all agreed, not only have we all agreed on this, but we all know what the standard should be. And now we're all going to make sure that we're adhering to it across a global economic forum. I mean, that's a difficult sell for me to think that a couple of standards can be written in a short period of time and all of a sudden we're all on the same page. Because then you bring it all the way back down to this, this subject around Black Lives Matter and are all cops racist and stuff like that. I mean, look, I think I think that you're obviously tongue in cheek with that, and I think the way you did that was good. Are all cops murdering racists? I mean, like you said, I think it's it does a disservice to the complexity of the situation by just saying the reason that cops, stood on George Floyd's back and suffocated the life out of him was because he just didn't like Black people, or he just didn't like anybody that wasn't white. I mean, that's a little bit. I understand Occam's razor and all that stuff, but I think that's a bit too simple. Just to say that he woke up today and thought, or that somehow a prejudice that we all have leads to murder or leads to these ultimate decisions like this that impact somebody's life. Now, where I think the issue truly lies is I think it's systemic. I think if you look at some of these things, if you go back and read some of these books and stuff that we're talking about, when you have a system that has allowed for division and actually encouraged it and supported it and manifested it, that system has a result. And not to simplify it or make it so, not to be trite, but what I keep thinking about as I start to look through this, there's a gentleman called Dr. Deming, and he actually used, it's called a red bead theory, and it had nothing to do with race. What it had to do with was quality around manufacturing. And so what he did was he basically made this demonstration where kind of this ridiculous process of separating white and red beads using this the poorest way to do it in such a way that you got the results that you wanted. So he does this test. It's basically a loaded test, and part of his demonstration was no matter who the employees are that are tasked with doing this, if the system is set up for them to almost randomly or just to fail, no matter how hard they try, they cannot overcome the inherent flaws in the system. The system dominates the individual. I can't, it's like giving somebody a broken medium. If you gave me a mic that worked every once in a while doing this, and it went out every 10 seconds for 5 seconds, I couldn't speak properly, right? No matter how hard I tried, or I could sit here and try to time it, right? It would eventually break up and not work. And the problem is the microphone, right? So I mean, again, a bit simplistic, but for some reason it keeps going through my head that if the justice system, which I think alludes to what Dusty was saying around, look, the war on drugs is a failure. The war on drugs is an abject failure in so many, like I don't know any positives from it other than funding, the militarization of law enforcement and giving them more and more budgets. Other than that, and I mean that quite honestly, other than that, what benefit to society, if you call it that, has it brought? I mean, has it brought control? Has it brought, what area of the entire, cultural and socioeconomic system has benefited from making these things illegal? And we criminalize all these efforts, and then it turns around and makes I think the system creates these militarized, good guy versus bad guy situations around law enforcement. So that you're just looking for the bad guy. I was, it extends into the penal system. I was driving last summer through Pennsylvania with my youngest daughter. I was up there for a friend of mine's wedding. And I'll never forget beautiful Pennsylvania day. We're going to Hershey, Pennsylvania to do all that stuff. And there's this massive billboard, and it was an advertisement to join and to become an employee of the Pennsylvania penal system of some sort. And the very top of it said, "Join the winning team." That was what it said. In a big billboard, like, hey, if you want to be part of the good guys, you want to join the winning team, don't be like the guys in prison, but be in charge of them. And it's just, and as soon as you start making profit, there's a book I'm reading right now. It's kind of an extension on the new Jim Crow around mass incarceration, but it actually is it's a real internal, back to the faith part of it, where this gentleman's writing this book, and he's talking succinctly about that the church, we failed in so many different ways in so many areas. It's not just mass incarceration. It's the penal system itself, which is around, which jails and prisons, which are multi-billion-dollar, industries that have. There's a, and I forget which one it was. I apologize because it's been a little. It's an audio book and I'm in between a little bit. But there's a town. There's places like in Arizona and other states that actually where there's a contract with the town or the city or the municipality with the prison system that guarantees full occupancy of the prison, of the jail, or else the city has to pay anyway. It's like having a hotel and requiring full vacancy or full occupancy and no vacancy. Like, what is the goal of the system? What are we trying to do with our justice system? Are we trying to minimize injustice from happening? Are we trying to, and then if it does, are we trying to make sure that we somehow rectify that on some level? Because it sure doesn't seem like it in terms of the system that we've created, the one that it is now. And there becomes all this pride and, oh my gosh, we can't look over and think anything difficult, any discerning or negative commentary around these men and women who haven't put their lives on the line. And if you even suggest something around this area, around this, somehow you hate cops or you want cops to die, or you become an anarchist or something like this. And then of course, like y'all were saying, I think rather well, is this hodgepodge kind of reaction that gets blamed. And then, it's just not a well organized and I guess clear messaging around where the frustration is. And so you have multiple voices and the world's just sitting back and going, aha, and they're grouping it all together. And it's like this idea of, when the LA, there's a sheriff's department, the two cops that were sitting in their car and got shot. The guy just walked up and shot him. And if you go back and, like you said, Dusty, if you start reading the headlines, they're linking them to protesters, or there were protesters that were trying to stop them from going to the hospital. And I was trying to have this conversation with a friend of mine, and I was just trying to point out, I'm like, so if Black Lives Matter as an organization, it's a 501c3, as this organization is sitting there on a day-to-day 9 to 5, somehow they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening so quickly that they know these cops got shot. And by the time they transferred to the hospital, they were able to then organize a group of protesters, send them there for no other reason than to block them from going in or coming out or creating some sort of chaos around the situation. And if you go back and I'm like, I can hardly keep, my day-to-day schedule intact, let alone, and I know organizations and I know they can be fluid, but the idea that they get linked into that, and then you start reading into the second and third level, verification around, okay, who knew these were protesters? And then it's like a person told a reporter they heard somebody yell this. And it's like, okay, but that has nothing to do. And then let's say somebody wore a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, or they were shouting some sort of slogan. I then flip it and go, okay, well, wait a minute. Is every Dallas Cowboys fan properly representing the Cowboy organization every time they do something, as they wear is every employee of every corporation or every organization, is every McDonald's employee, just because they happen to be wearing the logo or say that they're part of that, do they even really functionally understand all the different things that organization is trying to do? And is everything that they're doing properly representing everything, the Marine Corps? What's the first thing you start seeing about when you see these violations, especially around the United States military and other things like that? This did not represent the spirit of what we're about. This didn't represent this. And yet somehow, an organization like Black Lives Matter, albeit with the issues that they have, somehow gets lumped into all this. And there's nobody defending it in that way and saying, look, maybe they did think this was in line with it. Maybe there are like a little bit like the cops in a different way, as Dusty was alluding to. I mean, the idea that, I try to empathize as much as I can around this, but I know what I feel like when I'm mistreated for something like, any reason that's not really valid, if you will, how tall I am, my education, income level, stuff like that, that in the end of the day, I don't believe is a real marker of a person. Definitely not their worth, definitely not a marker of what they're worth. And if you look at the history and the system, the way things are set up, I just kind of go, there's a level of crazy that comes into this that I think that people they don't know how to react. They don't know how to properly, back to police officers. How do you properly get a call first thing in the morning to a domestic violence case and either a woman's been beaten or a child has been beaten or there's been violence to somebody or man to woman to man, whatever it is. And then that's your morning. That's how you start off your Monday morning. And then the rest of the day, you're supposed to go out and engage the public in a constructive way when you've had this massive traumatic event that's happened in front of you with little to no social understanding or mental health or some sort of like comprehensive understanding of what you just went through. And then they're wired up and go. I remember watching the video from Philando Castile. That cop was like, where was all of that coming from? Like all the agitation and the paranoia and the fear that he had in his mind.
Mm-hmm. I can actually tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
And this is some videos I have been watching that were doing kind of analysis of police training in those areas. So they were basically using this kind of fear-based training. I think it's called warrior policing or warrior cops or something like that, that basically instilled in cops that almost everybody that they have to stop is like the enemy, and then made them extremely paranoid, which is not the way you want to make to instill in the people who are serving the public. Like everybody that they're dealing with doesn't have to be their enemy. Like that, I don't understand how the Philando Castile thing got to where it was at all. Doesn't seem like they were being stopped for a violent crime, from what I understand. It had something to do with.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I actually haven't heard of this particular case.
Oh, the Philando Castile, basically, they get stopped, and he tells the officer that he's a legal gun owner and he has a permit, and he was going to give him his documentation, I suppose. We're talking about, license and registration. And the cop yells at him and then opens fire into the car. And there was a woman and a young, I think like a 2-year-old in the car.
It was his daughter. It was her daughter or his daughter?
I think it was her daughter. But it's just insane. Like the guy ramped it up to like 11 in like 5 seconds and then started shooting.
Yeah.
And it's just that these cops were trained using a specific program. I forgot what it was called. It's called like warrior policing or something like that. And I know
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, during the most recent, not most recent, but right after the Floyd incident, they did talk about this training program that the Minneapolis police were using, and they were using the same program as is the guy who shot Philando Castile was also training under the same program. And when I get the chance, there's actually a pretty good, like the two people that have covered this in particular that I've watched are Hassan, what's his name? But he's a
Hassan Piker.
Yeah, he has the Patriarch Show. And John Oliver. Yeah, and John Oliver has also covered the same exact issue with the warrior policing.
Okay.
So yeah, it's definitely, they had that mentality trained into them.
Mm-hmm.
It's specifically for those departments that we're talking about, Philando Castile and the most recent one. So yeah, it's definitely a training issue that really needs to be looked at.
And I think like a large piece of this can connect back to the drug war, like you were talking about, Sean. Like all three of us, obviously, we talked about that book, The New Jim Crow, before, and like to me, the biggest problem with the drug war is that you're making it a crime for people to use a drug, even if it causes damage to them, but even if they're not harming anyone else in the process. And because like the like police are drawn to high crime areas due to quotas and wanting to keep those prisons full, as you mentioned. They go to disproportionately black areas because the high crime areas have disproportional amounts of black people, so they kind of like feed into this stereotype, and then it becomes a negative feedback loop, and then it ends up being disproportionately black people arrested for drug crimes, and then because people in Black Lives Matter, or I should say some people in Black Lives Matter, boil everything down to nothing other than race in terms of the problems with police brutality. People don't talk about the fact that there are white victims too, which could be used by people. It could even be used by leaders in Black Lives Matter to, well, if there were like leaders that everyone respected, to unite people for the cause by the cause with solving the problem of police brutality for people of all races, particularly like lower class people in general, who it seems to affect the most.
Yeah, and I think the real big issue there too is that you have, it's I think where some of the frustration from the Black Lives Matter movement or from African American community, I would guess, and as I took from the book that I felt was, it wasn't just that they were trying to protect us, quote unquote, from these terrible drugs, which as a young child, that was kind of my first initial thought. I've never been a big person. Rules don't bother me because typically, in my experience, the vast majority of rules are meant to protect. They're not meant to like keep people from something or whatever else, right? I mean, an uncontrolled substance, one of the biggest issues around it, and even I've learned some stuff recently around overdosing, that it's not even that you overdose on the actual narcotic or whatever. It's just maybe it's a combination of certain things. It's a lack of an awareness. I actually have a personal friend of mine whose son died from a fentanyl overdose, or from a fentanyl, a dosage that was too strong of fentanyl because he was doing a little coke after a night working as a sous chef that he had done before, but he got it off the street. Well, some guy cutting cocaine with fentanyl in his, I don't care who the person is, probably has no understanding of chemistry or what's going on, or understands how to apply. He has no training at all. He just knows that I can get a little bit more. I need to get more money, and I can spread my product, my inventory. It's a basic economic thing. So what ends up happening is because it's not controlled and because it doesn't have parameters around it, people die from that kind of stuff. And so it's this kind of Wild West application of it. And so the idea of creating, standards like we do in the pharmaceutical industry, which I know have their problems, but they're much better than what they could be in terms of if it was just kind of up to anybody that wanted to do anything. But it's definitely a much better system to have some sort of control over it. So that was my understanding as a young person, even up until I said even recently, at least in some areas, that isn't that the real idea. And then you come to find out that that not only does none of that, so much of that, like not only is it not true and it ends up not being that way, but you start looking at the drugs that are outlawed versus the ones that aren't, with alcohol and tobacco, and you're like, and I always tell people this, I'm like, I can go kill myself tonight at a bar legally and socially and with social responsibility. No one's going to get mad at me for sitting there having shots of vodka or going and buying a couple of liters of bourbon and just drinking myself. I can go do that today. But if I want to, if I just want to take CBD oil, everybody's like flipping out, like I'm getting ready to, like, what's going to happen? You're going to become a druggie, and it's like, holy, like, all right, come on. And so all that to say, and what I'm getting at is, I think a lot of the frustration that tends to create maybe a more unfortunate response is because, back to the new Jim Crow, when you start to see it's not just about protecting us from ourselves, but now there's things in there that are just subtle enough. Like the one that always sticks out to me is the cocaine versus crack in terms of possession, and it was legal, like there's legal precedent, like it was in the laws that you have a greater, I guess, punishment for a different kind of cocaine. Like, why? What is the? There's no way that I don't think anybody could ever give me a justifiable reason. If you have the same amount of crack and the same amount of powder cocaine, why you would have a different sentence? Why? It makes no sense.
Wasn't there misinformation about how crack is a stronger drug? Like there was literally deliberate misinformation about that? I thought I had heard something about that.
I think the real thing, way back to what Desi was saying about so much information. There's so much information about the misinformation about what is what. I couldn't tell you from a definitive standpoint. I think if you go back and listen to the rhetoric, you go back and listen to the way people act like, there is this idea of, kind of categorizing certain drugs around certain groups and certain people and what's acceptable and whatnot. Like I said, somebody's an alcoholic. It's like, it's unfortunate, but if somebody's a quote unquote drug addict, that doesn't mean alcohol or tobacco, even though it's still a narcotic and a drug. And it just becomes so confusing around what is I think where the frustration comes too is like, what is the intent? Are we trying to go back to, the whole motto of the law enforcement is to protect and to serve, not to like get you if you're doing something wrong. That's not what it's supposed to. It's not go find the bad guys. That's not the motto, but it's become what the system wants you to do. That's where the rewards are to some extent, right? There's an element of going and getting the bad guy and justifying your existence versus shouldn't the goal of that prison be to not even be full? Like to have nobody in it? Isn't that right? Isn't the idea that if George Floyd passed off a counterfeit 20, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world to die for? And I'm going back, I don't know if y'all have seen the Officer Lane's body cam footage. He's one that actually was the first officer, one of the first two officers on the scene. And he's the one that engaged with George Floyd first. Like if you go back and watch that whole video, it's just sobering. And I showed this to my friends. I'm like, they go in the store and find out that he passed off this counterfeit 20. And then they walk outside and he's in the car and you even hear him say about 10 feet from the car that he tells his partner, there's a lot of movement going on inside there. And all I can think about is at that moment right there, he didn't know George Floyd's name. All he knows is this guy passed off a counterfeit 20. Like let's in this massive criminal mind of George Floyd, right? Who passed off a counterfeit 20. And I keep saying that because it's $20, not a 50 or 100. He wasn't printing 20s and handing them out to the neighborhood. He wasn't known as a counterfeit. They didn't know anything about him. They don't even know if he knew that. I wouldn't know a counterfeit 20 I wouldn't know if I dropped it. I just spent a 20 this last weekend. I don't know if it was counterfeit or not. I have no idea. And the whole thing that gets me is as they're walking up, he says that almost as if you've ever had people in the car, like people moving around and it was parked on the side of the street. And there are people moving in it. Why is that a sign? Back to this warrior, this kind of this prepping and like, here, this is the scenario they've gone through in their training and that they've heard about and seen about. They're moving around for a gun. They're moving around, but that's what they're doing. And again, the guy didn't run his plates. They didn't know who it was. As far as everything I can tell from the conversation. I mean, it's his body cam footage. Like there's no second or third level interpretation. Like it's his video conversation. The guy points to him. They walk over there. He didn't leave the scene. If you passed a counterfeit 20, would you stick around? Would you stick around to see what happened? And if cops showed up, wouldn't you drive away? Why would you just be sitting there? And then he taps on the window, and he starts to roll the window down or open the door. And within 10 seconds of him tapping on that window, he's got a gun drawn, pointing it at the back of George Floyd's head. And I don't understand that at all. He did not identify himself as a police officer. He doesn't say anything to him. I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, there's basic statutes. You're supposed to at least go through some identification process, letting him know what's going on. He doesn't even understand what's happening. And as soon as you hear George Floyd talking, he is scared out of his mind. And he even tells him, I had cops shoot me before. That's called trauma. This isn't, he sounds like no offense, he sounds like a baby. And I just don't believe that I don't believe he's faking it. And the whole thing goes downhill from there, but I don't understand. And one person that I know, I'm like, if you had a cop pointing a gun at the back of your head within 10 seconds over a counterfeit 20, and you don't even know why they're doing it, you would be outraged and be flipping out. Right. Mm-hmm. And yet we're looking over here going, he should have just shut his mouth and do whatever he's supposed to. He needs to stop resisting arrest. He needs to stop doing all this other stuff. And then they have these other videos of like people that, that there's this woman in Oklahoma that I always think about, this grandma who like had a 6 month plus registration out of date. Cop wants to give her a ticket and she basically tells him she's not going to accept it. And then like drives off. He has to tase her and all this other stuff. It's like 15 minutes of like pursuing this lady. She did do that. She violated that and knew that it happened. And at the very end, she's like, well, it's just because I'm country. And I'm thinking, if that the lack of understanding I really think part of back to frustration, maybe some of the frustration around I would say the African American community doesn't even speak to this, is because it's such a when that dichotomy is so imbalanced so many times over and over again, and there's just this massive gap, which we know, right, this cognitive dissonance of just not being able to see them and you. I think that's the real issue. We don't see them the way we see ourselves. And I have this conversation with people all the time. I'm like, well, how would you feel at that point? How would you react to a cop that just knocked on your door and didn't tell you anything?
Mm-hmm.
Would you know and if he had his gun pulled on you, what would you do? How would you react? Or if, like in that one, the guy, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, like two guys like running him down in a street with gun. I don't have a clue what that, like, what kind of world is that?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's the separation. And yet, we joke around with the Karens and stuff like that, but I mean, not to be trite about it, but it's like, and yet it's just a massive social and cultural disconnect of what the day-to-day life is like, and even having a clue about it. And all I can do on my level, like I've told you, where I can try to empathize, but at the end of the day, I have no idea. I just know that what I see and what I think is the potential is so grave that we need to sit down and listen. We need to sit down and have a conversation, and even frustration and anger. And then the last real thing, because I think it's important, because Dusty brought up earlier, talking about defunding the police. What does that mean? We hear that once. Like my friend told me the other day in the car I was telling you about. He goes, well, they want to get rid of the nuclear family. And I'm like, wait a minute.
What?
Right, exactly. So you say that and it becomes sensational, right? And he just stopped at that. I go, wait a minute. I go, tell me more about what you're saying. You're telling me that Black Lives Matter wants to just get rid of the nuclear family. Yeah. They want to destroy the nuclear family. I'm like, okay, well, and so he looked it up, and on their website, what it says, and I can look it up right now just to verify I get it right, because I think it's important. Hold on. Because once we slowed it down, it started to make. Let me find. I want to find this. See if I can find the statement.
Okay. Well, will you look for that?
So I got it.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So it says we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. When I had him read the rest of that, and I stopped him, this is a friend of mine I go to church with, and I said, well, I go, but that's what Jesus said. He's like, what do you mean? I go, what are you talking about? I go back and read. Do you remember? And Jesus says this in the Bible. And I'll go back. There's a point in time where I forget which, it's either in Matthew or in Luke, where he's sitting there and they come up to him. They were like, Rabbi, your mother and brother have come to see you. And he looks over and basically says, I'm with my brothers and sisters now. That, in other words, these were his sisters, but these were his family as well, the community that he was creating. And I, as I read this, and I said, what they're talking about here, and this is something that I would say, I would challenge anybody out there. The typical American nuclear families, mom and dad are in charge of the kids, and then that's kind of it. Like legally, you're responsible for them, and that's it. And I would argue that on a day-to-day basis, most parents, one or two, are overwhelmed, and that trying to raise and create an environment for people where it's just the two parents and we're supposed to do everything and not have a collective community around, which is called family, by the way. Family used to mean everybody, and we've had it boiled down to where it's just mom and dad, and then they can only tell you what to do to the time you're 18, and then it's over, and now you're free to be an adult, and there's nothing else that's out there, right? It's this. So I think there are, and here's the thing. I could think my wife and I are extremely active in our kids' lives. We do all these other things, but I would tell you that we're overwhelmed on a daily basis. I would say that, and I've said it all the time, and I'm not going to say it's not because I don't try, because I'm not competent. It's because that's a huge task. And so looking at a system that has created disruption, even in the family, all the way down to the nuclear side anyway, in the African-American community for centuries, and they're trying to say, we disrupt. It didn't say they wanted to destroy. They wanted to change. They wanted to juggle it up a little bit. Can we expand this idea of family to beyond just who's in the house, to include the people down the street, to include the people that may be suffering and may need that little help, may need help, to be more supportive of that idea, more communal. And I ask them, I go, don't you, community is strong. Like we're out bike riding. I'm like, I could go do it by myself, but doing it as a group. There's something that happens when you're with a community. It's what we strive for this. So it's one of these things where if they don't continue to read, they just hear, oh, they want to disrupt the nuclear family. Oh, they want to the one Dusty was talking about. They want to defund the police, and then you hit a period, and then that's just it. And then you can let your imagination reign, or somebody else decides to fill it in for you to tell you what that means by that. They want you to be unsafe. They want to lead you to your to the wolves, and so that you can't have not only can you not have a gun, but now the cops can't have a gun. So what are you going to do when the mean evil guy breaks into your house and tries to steal everything? And then so there becomes this fear-based narrative, and now everybody's like, oh my gosh, this group they're terrorists and they need to be whatever, right? And then somebody acts like a jackwagon and actually set something on fire, and then they flip out. And last thing, and I just want to say, I was having this I started asking a friend, he was like, well, they destroyed property, they did this other stuff, and I said, we did the same thing with the Boston Tea Party. When we were colonialists, we didn't like colonialists. I guarantee you, this conversation was happening just like we were having it, only it was happening in the UK and in Britain at the time. And they're looking over going, these hooligans and crazy, look at they're destroying stuff and they're revolting on the rest of the stuff. I said, why is it different? Why is it different if that's how they're acting? I can't believe they're destroying stuff. There's just no call for that. I agree. It's not okay to do that, but you have insurance, not to be trite about it, but is it worth, turn around and shooting people? Is it turn around and, is that the answer? Is this violence? And then I think that the disconnect to realize that we rebelled against somebody that we didn't like the way they were treating us. That's how our country got started.
Yeah.
In Texas, that's how our state got started. We didn't like the way that Mexico was treating us, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. We didn't like it, and we fought, and we decided we weren't going to take it anymore. And that's more American. That's as American as anything else. And yet when a group has some element of that, it's like they're terrorists and they're awful. It just depends on which side of the fence you're on, is what is the point I was trying to make. I said, and it was just, and then they're not sure what to say at that point most of the time.
Yeah, like this made me think about how, one of the biggest problems of these violent situations, not only between just any people and cops, like Black Lives Matter people, or like right-wing people and cops, or like right-wing people and Black Lives Matter people, or they're a wide variety of different groups of people that go to these protests that sometimes become violent. And they're nuanced situations. Like Parker on our last podcast was telling me about a situation that I had not heard of yet, where I forget what it was. I think there was this guy, he went to a Black Lives Matter protest with a gun, looking for wait, it was actually, I think probably both of these situations have happened. That, and also I think in this case it was a guy who was he went to a Trump rally actually or something, and he was looking for Trump supporters to shoot. Or wait, it was it was, sorry, it was the first way. It was this guy who went to a Black Lives Matter rally, and he was like looking for people, looking to instigate with things so they would get violent. But so someone came up, he was just walking away after the situation almost became violent. And then as he was walking away, someone came and tried to take his gun away. So, and then other people, a group of people came up, and they were trying to assault him, and they had weapons. So he shot the guy who was trying to take his gun away. And then a few of the other people also had guns, and they shot him. So to me, that sort of situation says that one of the main problems is just in general people bringing guns to these places. Like, then you're just asking for violence. Like, that doesn't mean that the violence was justified in any case necessarily, but like that's why these things can get so bad, in my opinion. One of the main reasons, anyway.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all that, Dusty?
Yeah, the whole bringing weapons to a protest deal just makes zero sense to me. Like, I really don't get why anyone would want to do that. I know it's happened on both sides. The left and right have done this. I just don't get it. It doesn't look good on their part to do this. Um, it's just unnecessary escalation. Like, once you throw a gun in there, it can only go further than that. It's typically so. Yeah, I really don't understand the whole bring a gun to a protest deal. And I know there's the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, which absolutely boggles my mind. Um, is people just don't understand what they're doing. I think he was going to go out and protect other people's property. Um, I'm in the business of property protection. That's not how it works. You can't
Yeah.
just show up at someone's business and say, "Hey, I'm protecting your business," without their consent. You do need to be a legal agent of whoever owns the property. So he didn't have any legal authority to do anything, including holding a weapon on that property. So it's just ignorance, man. That's all I can say, really.
Hmm. This is making me think about like different interactions with cops too. Like I've only had a handful of interactions with cops in my life, and they've been mostly positive. The only time I can think of, there was one time where there was this really impatient cop who was dealing with me at a check stop, and I didn't hear him the first time he asked for my license and registration, and then he immediately just yelled at me and told me to pull over to the side of the road. So he checked my license and registration like he was with everyone else, and there were no problems, so he let me go. But that level of animosity was totally unnecessary. But then, like, most recently, I was on a trip to Edmonton, the nearest big city, and I was trying to I was trying to get to Fitness Depot to pick up a kettlebell that I had ordered before they closed, and my GPS on my phone had me going the wrong way down a one-way street. So as soon as I started doing that, I saw a cop trying to pull me over. So I pulled over into a parking lot, and I explained to him exactly what was going on. I said, "Oh, sorry, I think I was going down a wrong way street there. Hey, I'm trying to get to Fitness Depot before they close. My GPS had me going the wrong way down this one-way street." And then the cop just he asked me where I was going. I showed him on my phone, and he gave me directions, and I said, "Sorry about that. Thanks for your help." And it was like the most positive interaction one could possibly have. And then like there and then in terms of other people, like I remember relatively recently there was this case right here in town where I live where one cop pulled over a native guy in a truck. I think he was in a truck with his girlfriend, and the guy got instantly aggressive with the cop, and the cop was trying to de-escalate the situation, and the guy got out of his truck and he like put his fists up like he was going to try to fight him, and the cop kept trying to de-escalate the situation, and then wasn't successful in that, so the guy started literally assaulting him, and other cops showed up, and as soon as those second cops showed up at the scene, one of them just tackled the guy right away. And then the way that it was reported in the media was that it was this group of racist cops who were just being overly aggressive and racist to this guy because he was native. But you had to look into the story in more detail to find that it's a little more nuanced than that. And like, but at the same time too, like a small part of me in terms of that most recent interaction with a cop was thinking that I wonder if he would have reacted the same way if I were not a white guy. So Like this just brings me back to what I was saying at the beginning, and that what we've been talking about, that these are all very complex multifactorial situations, and they're all different to depending on the situation.
Yeah, I think you said something really important, and that's the nuances of each individual situation and each individual circumstance, and what we know and what we don't know, and how just applying a broad brush of racism or sexism or whatever as the core catalyst for why it's happening, really, even if it's part of it or a big part of it, doesn't tell the whole story, and it really doesn't do. I don't know what we gain from it in terms of that. I mean, what are we? It's this. It's like putting a label on it. It's like, okay, so what does that mean? Because obviously there's things we need to rectify around the system and around the people and the way that we conduct ourselves. But what am I going to sit there and act like it's supposed to be some sort of Shangri-La? Let's just all sit around in a circle and tell each other how we feel. But at the end of the day, the best way for human beings to communicate and to rectify and to innovate and to do these kinds of things that we see ourselves doing is to actually sit around in a circle and talk about it, and to conduct ourselves in such a way. And we didn't. I mean, how did we get to the moon? How did we launch the space shuttle? How did we form governments? And how did we form? We didn't do it. We did it sitting around. What are we going to do? How are we going to rectify the situation? That's actually how we did it. And it just gets kind of poo-pooed as this touchy-feely thing. And it's like, well, like you said, violence. I mean, if you show up to a negotiation, if I showed up to a business negotiation carrying a hammer, or if I was armed or something, and with the intent to use it for the negotiation, that's going to have an impact on the nature of the negotiation, right? That is not and it's not something that we, in the way that you're impacting that in negotiation, is not true in and unto itself. It may be effective. You can get somebody's attention with it, and then it disrupts this opportunity for somebody like this who's trying to do the right thing for a bit. And then this other thing comes in, and then it's just blown out of proportion in terms of what that is. But so often it seems like that's the case. But also it's so tiring, because it seems like you can't take anything at face value at all, ever, no matter what it is, even, right? And then I think once you kind of start to see the sauce and the formula a little bit that you're alluding to around, look, at the end of the day, if you're not paying for something, you're the product. If you're not paying for something, you're what's being sold. I don't know if you guys have saw the recent Social Dilemma, the Social Dilemma documentary, but I think it paints a really, I think, stark picture of humanity for what we are, not whether or not Facebook is bad or Instagram is bad or whatever else. It's like anything else. It's how and what we do with it that is at the real core of it. And they couldn't even tell you what was wrong with it, other than there were some issues. And I think, and then when you're being, when you're the target around this, and you're trying, not only are you being influenced, or not only are you trying to understand what you're doing to get ahead of it, just to sell stuff or to try to get you to like stuff to sell, you are being manipulated, and you are being brought upon. And it's so interesting how a lot of these social situations, like, we know if you want a conservative viewpoint of it, if you want kind of the Republican conservative line, you know where to go to get that news. And you know how far you can go past it. Well, the same for the other side, right? But it doesn't feel like either one is there to inform you. They're just there trying to influence you, because they want you to sit there. And I had a friend of mine tell me this, and I keep referring to my friends because I'm in this world and we talk about this stuff all the time. Literally tell me that she had been watching Fox News all day long. All I could think about, and then you could tell by the way she was all that was coming out was what she had been hearing all day long. It was just coming out of her like a fountain. Like that's just, and that was the only perspective of it. And the narratives and these are smart, intelligent, thoughtful, kind people. And I know it always sounds odd to say that and go, well, they don't seem like it. If they, if they're saying some of the stuff that you heard them say, you'd be like, they don't sound very kind. It's like, but that's the thing. It's not one way or the other. It's not just either all kind or you're not, or you're either, back to what I keep referring to what Desi says, because I'm just thinking about it. If you're a corporation that says you think Black Lives Matter, now you should all of a sudden go buy my product. It's like none of these are linear, straight lines to either what you think or what you believe or what even is the truth, or what like even the truth means. It's super complicated. But I do think there is some simplicity in terms of how you approach it, right? I think if it's about power and control, it's going to be very, very difficult to convince me that that's not the overriding factor, right? In terms of why you're doing something and influence and stuff like that. Like if you're trying to ultimately create power and control for something for its own benefit, social order. It's like, I'd love to make sure that nobody ever. We have laws. It's always one of these things, gun control, the rest of this stuff. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't really matter. The gun control laws don't really matter. Like, we have laws that you can't go in and just randomly shoot people. Talking about Philando Castile and concealed handgun licenses, I know in my experience that people with concealed handgun licenses are typically the favorites that cops pull over because they know that they understand the law. They're not hired guns out frontier justicing this world and doing the Wyatt Earp thing where you're just kind of like taking it in your own hands. You can't just randomly shoot people in the state of Texas because you had a bad day or because they made a bad turn or because they said something mean to somebody. If you're in the wrong legally, you cannot just take somebody's life because you're for just random reasons. You're going to go to jail. That's why as heavily armed as you have people in Texas, and we are, and the people carry concealed handguns all the time, you don't hear about these random because they've been educated. They know they can't just go out and start shooting people. And they also know that if you bring a gun, it's part of the reason I got rid of mine. I'm like, I don't even want it to ever be an option. I mean, I'm just telling you flat out. I mean, I just never wanted it to be an option. And if you go look at statistics as far as like, I told my wife, I go, the likelihood of you dying by a firearm in this house is from me, and it's the one in our closet, statistically speaking.
Mhm.
Evil, terrible person is going to break in the house and then just shoot you because they have nothing else to do. But we've been this fear thing, going back to this narrative of like, oh my gosh, I mean, look at the political ads. How many of them show some grandma in a house? And do you really want somebody that doesn't care about law and order to go on the? It's like the go-to. There's the book, The Science of Fear by Daniel Gardner. I don't know if y'all read that one.
That sounds familiar.
It is an epic. It is an epic expose. It's around just the tenets of using fear for the benefit and for the misalignment of perspectives and how we look at things, especially from a true media standpoint. I mean, if you want to get people to read your articles, if you kind of alluded to in the very beginning, right? Make it a sensational headline, make it something that's going to get people's attention. Truth is boring. Libraries are boring to most people, right? They want to hear sensationalism and get all excited and crazy words and stories about rapists and murderers. And oh my gosh, the lady in the closet that shot, the NRA wants to talk about the mom defending her kids in the closet. And thank God she had a gun, or else God knows what would have going to happen. Here's our heroes and stuff like that. And then what I think is really interesting is most of those people that actually go through that don't ever want to talk about it because it's not something that's, shooting and killing a human being is not a pleasant experience. It's just not. I know it happens in unbelievable quantities and has, but it is not a good thing. It's not, the process is not, I mean, taking the life of anything is just not, we should respect that process and however we do it and when it happens. Anyway, I'm kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I just think so much of it is difficult because and then we're trying to do all this on top of the day to day in our country, in our culture, right? So to have room in the 9 to 5 of our hectic lives to throw in something as meaty and heavy as race relations and the history of misogyny and gender discrimination, or same thing with gender discrimination and race discrimination and sexual discrimination. That's a hard Monday night to have, or a Tuesday, or a Wednesday, or a Thursday, or whatever. But you ignore it at your peril from a culture and a society standpoint.
And especially for you guys in America there right now. I know you guys are doing okay, but a lot of people due to coronavirus have lost their jobs and they're socially isolated because so people aren't interacting as much. And I'm stealing this point from other people. I've heard say it before, but that I think that's a piece of this too, that people are not interacting as well. So all their interactions are like through Twitter and stuff. So it's like more likely to lead to them being more angry and on edge in real life.
Yeah. And I think one last thing is I think it's kind of pertinent because it plays into this too is I know my oldest daughter is dealing with, and I think a lot of people her age, I'd be curious what you said about this true from both y'all standpoints, but this is kind of exposing the fallacy of social media in terms of the authenticity around relationships and the depth of those relationships and who really cares about you and who really is connected with you and how well they connected with you. And look, it's not that we don't understand there's some level of, I don't know, it's inherent around the fact that you can't actually be around them. You're up in Canada, I'm in Texas and I forget, Dusty, where you are. I think, is it East Coast or maybe it's West Coast, but
Yeah, I'm in Virginia, Northern
That's right.
Virginia.
So it's like we can't hang out and go grab lunch, right? But even people within the context of and now you can't even go and be around the people that you live next door to or that you regularly would, right? And so I think it's kind of exposing, it's showing some efficiencies. It's showing we can do some things. It's showing that we can, get work done at home as well. But I feel like there's a massive social anxiety around just wanting to connect. That I think is going to blow up. And you see it, people, especially in the States, right? We're not real good at following recommendations anyway. But I was in Austin this weekend, and like people are like, I don't have any idea where we're supposed to wear a mask, who's going to do it. There's like every night in the river down in Colorado, one of the Colorado rivers that runs through Austin. Every night at sunset, there's like hundreds of people on kayaks and stuff, just sitting around hanging out, and doing so out in the open and stuff like that, which is fine. And like the nuances around how far you should be and whether not open versus enclosed, it's like it just goes, it's ad nauseum, right? But I think there's a stirring that what I hope, which we can parlay into some of these issues, is community matters, connection matters, the quality of the connection matters. What in the world are we trying to do? What are we trying to do? Are we just trying to buy stuff, consume? Like, is that it? That's why we're here. The buy one get one. That's why we're here. That's the thing. I mean, I don't know. At least for me, that's just not enough for all this. Is just to buy one get one or something like that, right? But there's connection and community and people and coming together and working, and they're difficult. And we were down in downtown Austin yesterday, walking by people living on the streets, and obviously significant mental health issues and significant struggles going on. And I mean, we had a guy go by my wife and I. Young guy had to be in his mid-20s, screaming at the top of his lungs, calling everybody, a wuss, and using the, just wanting to fight anybody that would fight, like this, like a psychotic break this guy was having, and just challenging anybody that would look at him. And anybody wanted to fight anybody, in some, like literally, like walking by, and all I could think about was, okay, and now I got to figure out some sort of way to, contain this guy if he goes all super crazy. We'll just walk by and kind of, just. I'm not going to agitate or question or whatever else like that. But then you think, kind of to your point before, a couple of Austin PD show up because he threatened somebody. If my wife calls and goes, tells all about this, well, then the hero shows up, and now we got to go get the bad guy. And where does that guy end up? He probably ends up in a jail when he needs up in a psych ward, or not. I don't mean like a psych ward like to be committed, but like someplace to help him through whatever is causing that issue. And I mean that in a true, like, if it's whether it's a social worker or it's a true psychologist or something like that, that helping this guy go through whatever he's going through, it's going to put him in that situation to make it that, like, the best thing he can do that day is to walk around downtown Austin screaming at anybody and everybody that'll listen that he literally wants to kick the living crap out of him. That's not, I would imagine that's not normal, at least not in my world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like you were mentioning community there, and yeah, I think you're right. That's really important. Like the like what we were talking about Daryl Davis before, and he has this mindset of uniting people to solve problems, and like acknowledging our common humanity rather than dividing people. And like people are forming communities based on dividing themselves into this group based on this other group. And it's just it's exactly like Dusty and I have talked about The Coddling of the American Mind, Jonathan Haidt's new book with Greg Lukianoff, and I know you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt too, Sean. It's one of the three social distortions that they mention in the book, that the idea that there are good people and bad people, and it's all that simple. Like, we can put them into these two categories. These people have the wrong ideas, so we should not associate with them. And that happens like in literally every different type of ideology that you can imagine. And it's like a human characteristic, so we all do it. So we all have to like try to remind ourselves to understand that we have this common humanity, and that's very hard to do. And it seems like, well, I've interacted with people, as I told you guys about, who think that sort of mindset of uniting people together and acknowledging our common humanity is not only naive, but like literally evil, because you're even considering talking to the evil people.
Yeah, it's I've heard, I guess, similar things also, and I just don't get it. Like, I understand people want to be, they associate the feel like good feelings with feelings of being moral and good, and that maybe there's an emotional attachment to that. So saying like, oh, that guy's talking to that bad person, so they must be bad too. And I want to feel good and I want to feel good about myself. So I have to disassociate from the person who's talking to bad people because maybe I'll become a bad person
Mm-hmm.
because I'm associated with that bad person.
It's like their
But
ideas are viruses. You might catch them.
yeah, I guess there is a little bit of merit in that, but you can't just ignore or deem an idea bad without further investigation. Like you kind of have to look into it and see what's going on instead of just writing it off without even trying to understand where that person's coming from or what type of problems that person like. The weird thing is I kind of get the psychology of some of these white supremacists. Like I understand why they feel like they are oppressed because that's what it is. They feel like they have some type of oppression, and that is kind of an outlashing um, of anger because of that. Like, oh, they feel that their jobs are being taken, or some other reason because they might be in a bad place in life. And a lot of these white supremacists that come back to normal are able to realize like, hey, this was just a moment in my life that I didn't really understand. And a lot of that stuff is just fueled by ignorance, just not understanding. And I just don't get the mindset. Like, these people are your neighbors, you share communities with them. Would you rather just create a division that could end up costing you something, or do you want to invite them into the community and try to talk about your differences and mitigate the feelings um, that ignorance um, often creates, which is fear? Like, that's what you're trying to mitigate. A lot of the ignorant assertions are based off of fear. And how do you get rid of that fear? It's just by confronting it and getting knowledge about it. Like, it's things that we don't understand are often the things that we fear. So
For sure.
it comes to an understand. We have to understand the things that we fear, and I think that's kind of the catalyst and the basis of a lot of this anger. There's a lot of fear going on and a lot of misunderstandings of people not understanding each other or understanding their moral basis for some of the decisions that they make or some of the values they might have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think too that too, Dusty, around fear, not fear around if I'm not the good guy, then I'm the bad guy. Fear if I'm not, is there something wrong with me? Fear if in terms of not just being around somebody who's different, but just if where that we all want to be on the winning team, especially in our culture, like that's where the good guys are. We do all the things you're supposed to do. And so I maybe think of something else too, but real quick, the guy, Dominique Dubois Gilliard, writes, it's Rethinking Incarceration is the name of that book. But it also reminds me of another book that I read that's called The Nazi and the Psychiatrist. And it's basically about after the Nuremberg trials. So when the Nuremberg trials happened in World War II, back to like, we want to constantly look back and say, we defeated the Nazis. That's like, in the United States, that's like kind of our piece de resistance. It's like this is thing that we did. We rid the world of the Nazis. And I think what's unfortunate is what we've understood, and we all know this from our MMA days, is that the idea didn't go anywhere. Maybe the people that believed in it at the moment, but the idea of National Socialism hasn't gone anywhere. And the idea, and we like to scare everybody with like these words like Marxists and communists and the rest of this stuff, and socialists or whatever, and that fascist. And I think most people would sit around going, yeah, no idea why it's a bad word or what it actually means or why it would be a bad thing. They just attribute it to some sort of negative thing without even understanding what it means fundamentally. Is why there's such an irony around the Black Lives Matters, as you were saying, Desi, about being called Marxist, because it's kind of like they're not. While there's economic expectations, there's hope around economics. None of them that I've come across have said, what we really want to do is completely change it to this other system, maybe make it more equitable, maybe bring in some more balance around some areas around socialism that help certain areas and don't hinder or control or maintain and keep down, in a sense, around social programs, and maybe improving those. Those are those deep dive nuances that people don't want to get into. They just want to hear, oh, you want to change the system, and they think that means you hate America and you want everything to change. It's like, well, no, we want to improve it. We want it to be better. I mean, I think about Benjamin Franklin, and he's like, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. Well, that's still true today. Like, we're still charged with this need to continue to improve and maintain. And that's why this infatuation for going back about our founding fathers, of which we forget 90% of them, we don't even remember who they are. But somehow there's this essence of what the founding fathers wanted is this continuum of what we should be doing today. And it's like, they would think differently about today. There would be different, the reason they gave us that nimble aspect of it is so that we could adjust, so that we could move forward and we could change things. Right. And so but anyway, back to that book, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, one of the things that, one of the core tenets of that book that was so powerful to me was it was written about the psychiatrist that the United States Army assigned to the 22 prisoners at Nuremberg. So that included Hermann Goering, Hess, and the rest of these. Goering was the number 2 guy, right? Goering was number 2, head of the Luftwaffe. This guy was number 2, right below Hitler. Like, this is the dude. Like, he was the dude. And there was people even felt like he was probably more of the true leader around, for all this other stuff, the hero that, talk about the one that everybody looked up to in terms of ideology. They had him and then put him on trial. So what they wanted him to do was provide a psychiatric evaluation of these prisoners, make sure they're, kind of find out about them. But there was a bit of a expectation that they wanted to kind of hear this narrative that these were just basically super bad, evil people, crazy, psychotic, whatever it was. There was some sort of break, right? There was something that was different about these people that allowed all this stuff to happen. And you got to remember too, and I think this is really underplayed. Eisenhower, if you go back and read and look at some of the stuff he did, the genocide and the Holocaust, it's horrible and it's awful and it's terrible as World War II was in mankind, and predicated by, there was some, World War I, which was up until that point was just as horrible, was within a generation, if you will, of happening. The amount of devastation and the amount of carnage and death that these people, especially the higher level generals, had gone through was unprecedented in history in terms of scale and scope. But even the Holocaust took their breath away. Kind of like, have we gone this far? Right? This is where we are. And so I think there was such a desire and such an overwhelming need to try to find this distinction between good and evil, that no, this was the very essence of evil. And do not misunderstand me, please, in saying that I'm trying to say there's anything but, I don't even know how to adequately describe waking up in the morning. I remember reading a book, The Nazi Doctors by Robert J. Lifton, about the psychology of genocide. Numbers are fine, but what in the world could possess a person to do this? Like, I agree with their intent. And the part that was the most difficult for them around this particular doctor's findings around the 22 defendants was, for the most part, they were just normal people. They weren't like all psychotic. Hermann Goering wasn't a sociopath in the true nature of as psychology defined it, in terms of like a serial killer type sociopath. Psychotic. We wanted this label, and because it didn't have it, it didn't go well. They wanted this definitive thing to make these are the bad guys, we're the good guys. There cannot be a different answer. And I think it speaks to the fact that we are all capable of anything at any one point in time. They're not, the bad guys aren't over there, they're in here. And the only way I think to combat that is to put the guns down, is to put the bats down. And I understand why you want to take a bat to somebody. I understand why you would want to grab, Goering or Goebbels or what was it, Dr. Mengele, and like just gut the dude. I get it why you'd want to split that guy from crotch to neck and just pull him. I mean, just torture this guy to. I get why you'd want to do that. The only thing I don't understand is what it's going to do about the problem at the moment. Like what is that going to do for the people that are the victims? What is that going to do for those in the future? What is that going to do from a lesson standpoint? I don't know what lesson that's going to teach other than just make me feel good for torturing somebody to death that was, did awful, terrible things. I mean, that are beyond understanding. I get that, but I don't know I don't know what me doing awful, terrible things to them does. And that's where I go back to my faith in terms of, that's why I've been having this introspective struggle with violence and weaponry and guns. I grew up in Texas. I mean, this is what we do. And like, if somebody does something wrong to you, that, you meet them in kind and then some, right? This is what you do. And so I think it plays into the whole warrior mentality of just the American person. Like we are a warrior. We're kind of a warrior centered group. That's kind of our thing and been our thing for a while. I don't think we've always been that way. Like one of my favorite stats, and then I'll kick over to Dusty. But prior to World War II, we had the 17th largest army in the world. I saw that on a Netflix documentary that I was watching.
Oh, wow.
And the U.S. military was number 17 heading into World War II. We were the 17th largest military in the world.
I remember that it was small before World War I, but I didn't remember that it was that small after World War I too.
Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, everybody went home and went back to work. Like they didn't stay. They weren't professional soldiers. It was actually a big deal. I think even throughout the whole world, like being a professional soldier, a day-to-day soldier after World War I was kind of looked at. It was the war to end all wars. We weren't going to have war anymore. What would you? I mean, so you talk about like a light group. Like there wasn't, and nobody wanted to. So I think contrast that to now, and it's just you look at the military presence that we have in the world and have had for the last 70 years. It's incredible.
And increasing the military budget seems to be one of the few things that gets bipartisan support too, like approving Trump's military budget and even giving him extra money from the Democrats.
Because it makes us feel like we're safe and we're fighting the enemy. We're going to keep China over there. We're going to make sure the Russians don't do this, and we're going to take the fight to them, and we're going to make sure everybody's safe. That's the argument. So that with the basic tenet of of a person's, kind of the hierarchy of needs, right? You're appealing to a pretty basic one. And especially if we're doing it with heroes like, Jocko and the rest of these people that, that are out there fighting the good fight. Well, what could go wrong? Right? There's nothing. Well, hallelujah, and wave your flag and let's go get them. Let's go get them.
Gotta go. It's a similar kind of mindset as what we're talking about, the mindset of war. We got to go get those bad people and protect the good people from those bad people.
Yeah, I remember as a kid watching the movie Patton, and that I remember as a kid being stirred, like on a soul level, as he's telling the story at the very beginning of that movie. If you ever watch it, he walks up with the big American flag behind him, and he's got all his medals, and he gives this speech. And I mean, even as a young kid, like single digit, by 7 or 8, like holy smoke, this is amazing. Like whatever this is, I want more of this, right? You don't become a hero. You don't win by dying for your country. You make the other poor dumb bastard die for his, and it's like, all right, man, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, let's do this. Let's go out there and make sure that we're doing the right thing and being the good guys and all the rest of the stuff. And
yeah,
and I don't
like you can watch movies like even the.
Dusty, you there?
It makes like chills run down my. Oh, did I just get cut off for a second?
We lost you for we did the freeze for a second, but you're.
Oh, okay. Am I back there now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying like I'm a pretty anti-war person, but I can watch a movie like 300, for example, and it like sometimes it literally brings like tears of inspiration to my eyes, and it makes me want to go fucking fight people. Yeah. I'm not even a violent person, and it makes me want to go like, fuck, I want to get a sword and a spear and go kill some fucking invading Persians right now. Where'd that come from?
Right.
Well, yeah. I remember when I would watch Rocky as a kid, and I just wanted to go out and punch people, like right after that.
Exactly. No, I can remember walking out of the movie Braveheart in the military when I was in my early 20s. I can remember I was in San Diego. I can feel it. Like I remember coming out, like you said, I was just amped. I mean, my hair is standing up. Like I wanted to get a broadsword and go kill British people, like go kill the English. like in like that. I mean, like to your point, like I really felt like, and I mean I'm Scots Irish and all that other crap that we, even though it's like generations ago we like to run around and I'm Irish, I'm Scottish or whatever, and oh my gosh, this is just a movie of white Caucasian people oppressing other Caucasian people for the sake of power and control and manipulation, and people rebelling against it. And yet we have these heroes and the Michael Collins and the as far as the Irish and the rest of the stuff. And yet you will look at some of the stuff that happened. What do they call it in England? The Troubles, right? The Troubles, I think, is the what they use as far as all the issues up there in Northern Ireland and places like that. And I can remember a friend of mine. I was in the working at Schlumberger with years ago. He's a Brit, and it was after 9/11, and he actually said that he was kind of glad that it happened. And I need to just give me a second to complete this again. The spirit of what he was saying. He had grown up like in the tube in the public transportation place like that. They could never have trash cans. They could never have like bags. They'd been experiencing like IEDs and explosives and terrorist attacks from the Troubles, to where they couldn't even have trash cans in the subways, right? Like and they had lived with that, and we had never, we just, we're going about our day like no big deal, We got the Canadian, you got you guys to the north and Mexico to the south. What are we worried about? I mean, it's like there's nobody around here trying. We don't have any idea what that's like. And it's like it gave y'all a taste of what that terror is like, and that it's not pleasant. And so, because like it's from an armchair quarterback, you look over and go, "Oh, I can't believe they did this," and what about that? And this is happening over here, and all the rest of the stuff. And so, it just creates a perspective, unless you've had it kind of happen in your own backyard, that it's hard to relate to. But it's an awful steep price to learn a lesson. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think about all that, Dusty?
I don't know, man. Like, yeah, it's just something I got to think about a little more. As I do think about, like, as a kid, when seeing war movies and wanting to be like an army man for Halloween, and then you get older, you have a family, and then you think about, there's more to life than trying to fight somebody. It's just, I think it's a problem that maturity tends to solve, typically. But yeah, it does seem like as we're young, we tend to be a little bit more aggressive and prone to using physical violence as a solution, which is, that's one of the reasons why a lot of the military is very young. The people we send out are very young. And yeah, that's just something that we mature out of eventually, but even some of our leaders don't. So some of us definitely do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know that you had limited time there, Sean. So we could end it there soon if you want to, unless you guys want to talk about a few other things. If you have some time, up to you.
I mean, I do have to go, but I would say that what gives me hope, I think, is just any chance to kind of have dialogue and challenge. I love what Dusty's saying, and we do need to stop and step back, and then really kind of chew through this stuff and contemplate it and give it its just due, and not just act like the answers are simple or that we have them right now. It's ever changing. What does it mean, and how do I? And then really, I think the ultimate is, what can I do about it, versus sitting here and getting mad at the cop that that shot Philando Castile, or get mad at the the Black Lives Matter protester who took it too far, or for the president of the United States to make ridiculous statements or to not make ridiculous statements. I mean, it's so easy to point and make those people the bad guy, however we want, but really the work starts within, and that's where the hardest part is. Because I know for me, like, kind of this process of realizing some of these things and understanding privilege. And I mean, I went on a friend of mine's podcast. I think I told you about it. I spent an hour talking about my own personal, understanding and retrospect and inflection and introspect around understanding my own privilege, and that I didn't see it. I mean, I just didn't see it in me, at least, right? In terms of that I was privileged per se, right? Because I think the real issue there, and I would say this for anybody who's listening, who struggles with this especially in terms of white privilege. If you haven't figured out by now, you would categorize me, even though I wouldn't, as a white guy, right? But to that, I'm a right-handed, English-speaking, heterosexual, Christian American, and all that goes with that, right? And the whole world is set up for me, and I had to realize that, not for me, Sean, but for who I am. Like I'm 5'11", like everything is made with me in mind, everything. The way the drugs are tested, the way the restrooms are designed, the way the cars are designed, the way that everything is set up, it's set up for me. And I mean, I've been all over this world, and there haven't been one place yet that I can't speak the one language I know, right? I mean, and I try to start a lot of my friends out with the conversation in terms of even understanding the differences of, if you go back to war movies, right? Here's a way we flip the war movie a little bit. And that is, Saving Private Ryan has the guy that's the sniper that everybody loves. And if you watch it, he was kind of one of the heroes, and how amazing he was in saving the guys from these amazing sniper shots. If you go back and watch him shoot a gun, if you know anything about rifles, you'll notice something very odd about the way that he shoots, his shooting style, and how he has to, and then how he operates. He's shooting a bolt action rifle, in a World War II era bolt action rifle, and he's left-handed. Bolt action rifles were made for right-handed people, because right-handed people make up 90% of the population. So he has to shoot it left-handed, which means the bolt, to change it out, because it wasn't semi-automatic. It wasn't, you had to change, I mean, you had to chamber the round with the bolt every single time. So he would shoot, and then he'd have to reach completely over the rifle to open it up, to slide it back and put it down and bring it back. Well, that's not ideal. Left-hand, I mean, ask a left-handed person what it's like to use scissors, or if you're right-handed, go use something left-handed, that's not designed for a left-handed person. It's hard enough to do it anyway, or use something that's left-handed with your right hand. It's not. It's kind of part of the system. It's kind of part of how this thing is made. And I'm saying, so if the system is set up to benefit a certain group of people, or a certain mindset, or a gender, or sexuality, or religion, and it's an inherent system at the core of it, it's not even that this is where the system becomes the problem. Did people that were making the bolt action rifles in World War II hate right-handed people, or love right-handed people and hate left-handed people? I mean, there's stories you can go back, and people, even up in modern day, where there's been this desire to move somebody's hand, if they're left-handed, to like, no, you need to be right-handed. I mean, if you talk to people that are left-handed, they'll tell you stories about stuff like that. Some amazing stories. I mean, literally people being, physically assaulted to become right-handed. I've had somebody on my podcast that talked about that. And her name was Zeba Hassan, and she was actually accosted to use her right hand, and so she had to learn how to write right-handed.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and this happened in her lifetime. She's our age. She's my age. She's in her early 40s. So this isn't like so there's a little subtlety of that, but that's left and right-handed. Like, how's that a point of contention around the value of human life, or what you should or should not be like? Just what hand you are. It's effing ridiculous, man. There's got to be a better.
My aunt, who's left-handed, got discriminated against when she was growing up for that too, because she's I think she's in her 50s or 60s, and it seems like there was more discrimination against it, especially back then, that there is now. And hearing her stories about that sometimes just astounds me.
Right. So something as simple as what hand you are can create that kind of division. And you don't think that gender or sexuality or race, especially and then the last question, and I'll end it with this, is especially around this issue around where some of the frustration goes, or why, I hear this, why are they still angry? What's the big deal? Why can't they get over it? Blah, 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 or it's not that bad, or we've improved, and there's been improvements. I get all that. But what I ask them is, when did it change in our country? Like, what was the act? What was the moment? Because I thought, growing up as I did, that we all kind of agree, shouldn't, Holocaust bad, slavery bad, discrimination based on race bad, gender bad, everybody should vote. I thought there was a collective understanding of, this is not how we should be. And growing up the way that I did, I thought that was the collective mindset. And I think there's people that didn't get the memo. And I don't know when we even officially, formally said, it just kind of was and I asked him, I said, what is it? So the 1960s, nothing against what was accomplished. But then all of a sudden in the 1968 Civil Rights Act, everybody was like, oh, all right, come on, move into our neighborhoods and, own banks and, marry our daughters and, be our friends. Like that was the moment everybody decided that was okay. And we're ready to do that. Like, because statistically and everything else, it doesn't show that. So, you can make a law, but if you can't change the heart and mind, I don't care what your law says. I really don't. I mean, you can legislate all you want, but it's a heart and mind issue, which goes back to spending time and communing and to being there with them, with people, with everybody. If you want to get to know, you want to know what a transgender person, I mean, it's always, I think it was the guy that when we talked about last time, was my first time with your show, the one gentleman we had on, he said, I don't know what I would say to a homosexual person if I ever met him. It was your friend. Remember that?
Oh yeah, Shane.
And I didn't want to, because I didn't know him, was kind of afraid. But I really wanted to say, I wouldn't say anything to them. I would let them speak. That's what you should do. You shouldn't. Yeah. I shouldn't go up to Dusty and be like, "Well, Dusty, I got black friends, and I worked with a black guy one time, and I really, I love everybody, and like that's not what it should be. Is like, help me understand your viewpoint. Help me understand. Tell me about you. Tell me your story. Like your aunt. What made that story powerful is your aunt told it to you, right? You had to hear it. And so we have to take a moment and hear the stories and listen. Because when you start listening, it just, especially it becomes a bit, I don't want to say overwhelming, because if they're living it, we can listen to it. But it's a lot to take in a lot of the times, and it's hard and it's difficult. But I think if we know that and just honor that, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah. Well said.
All right, guys. With that, I hate to cut it short, but I'm going to head out, and really appreciate you doing this. As always, man, love the time and appreciate it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, man, really enjoyed it.
All right, be good, guys. Take care. All right.
All right, thanks, guys.
Take it easy.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say what I say at the end of my videos here.
All right, brother. Be good. Thanks. All right.
All right. Have a good night. Yeah, thanks to everyone who watched this. Thanks to all of you who clicked the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts. And thanks to all of you who support me on Patreon, which I always greatly appreciate. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And try to talk to people who you disagree with, and try to unite each other based on our common humanity. And anything else to say there before we end it there, Dusty?
Oh man, I think you said it succinctly. And yeah, just check out Andrew's stuff. Like and subscribe. Click that little bell on the video so that you get your updates.
Yeah, thanks.
And share his videos on social media.
Yes, please. And subscribe to Mixed Mental Arts too if you're not already. We do lots of chats there as well. And all right.
Sure.
Yeah, so thanks, man. Always great to talk to you. And thanks again to everyone. And adios until next time.